I'm obviously not in Spain, am I, at the moment? I'm not at the Chelsea Flower Show either. I'm in Shropshire at my father-in-law's house, and it's actually freezing cold and there's a howling gale, so not ideal. So I'm closeted away in a tiny little bit of the sheltered garden. So hopefully this will go according to plan. Now, what I wanted to talk about today was black and white photography, and I wanted to delve a little bit into what it is about black and white photography that makes it resonate differently with people. Why is black and white photography held to be so special? So I thought I'd have a look at one of my heroes, Don McCullin, and see what it is about his photography that makes it really resonate with people. So there's some obvious things. One is that he was a war photographer, so the subject matter, what he was shooting, was incredibly resonant and carries real impact and force. But beyond that, what we're looking at is really his use of contrast, his use of tone, his use of natural light, and his composition. Now he is incredibly gifted as a composer. He honed his craft in war zones all over the world with bullets whistling past his head, and he is a man that doesn't like to crop photos, so he mastered the art of composition in camera, and I think that's one of the things that does set him apart. But the thing too that is really worth considering is that his experience as a war photographer seems to bleed into his landscape photography. So he's done a lot of landscape photography in the south of England, and it is almost universally dark, brooding, imposing feeling that can only really have come out of his experience as a war photographer. I like to speculate what would happen if you took an artist like Joe Cornish and put him next to Don McCullin in the field and had them both say the same photograph. Now my guess is that Joe Cornish's photograph would be a celebration of the English landscape. It would be full of warm colours and it would be a beautiful pastoral piece of art, whereas I think Don McCullin's would retain that brooding intensity that he brings from his war photography. And I think the point that I'm trying to make here is that we bring something of ourselves into our photography, and this is an unconscious process, and when we have experiences as extreme as Don McCullin's, it can perhaps become very pervasive, and I think that's a good thing. One of the other interesting things that I found about this exercise of looking at Don McCullin's photography is, Don McCullin has been a hero of mine forever. I can remember seeing the photograph of the gang in Finsbury Park in the newspaper when I was a very young child, and it was etched on my consciousness. And I loved his war photography, and his landscape photography is absolutely masterful. And yet he is almost the polar opposite of this type of photographer that I am, and I found that quite interesting because it makes a point about when, there is something about our heroes that we want to emulate, obviously, because otherwise they wouldn't be our heroes. But the point I'm trying to make is it's not about copying their style or trying to find out what their technical process is and trying to emulate that. It's got nothing to do with that, and the proof of the pudding is in this. If I look at McCullin, he shoots exclusively on film, I shoot exclusively on digital. He exclusively uses natural light. Well, I do almost exclusively use natural light. He doesn't believe in post-processing. I believe in post-processing a lot. I do a lot of post-processing. Some of it is simpler than others, and I am faithful to what I perceive as a natural look, but nonetheless I rely on post-processing to give my photographs the impact. But I mean, you can argue that is part of the shooting raw process. A raw photograph on its own wouldn't be particularly impressive. But nonetheless, he is a real advocate of getting it right in camera, and his entire life experience has led him to a point where 9 times out of 10 he gets it right out of camera. I'm probably doing him a huge disservice, probably 99 times out of 100. But there it is. It's a real difference, and so the message that I'm trying to get across here is that we're in control of our own journey in photography. If you assume that photography is a journey from the point that you pick up your first camera and fumble around with the settings, going through mastering, aperture, ISO, shutter speed, etc., processing, etc., until the point we drop dead, then it follows that we're in control of that journey. We're in control of the individual steps. And the point that I'm trying to make is that mastering ISO, aperture and shutter speed is an absolute necessity in that journey, but it's not the end point. Analysing Don McCullin's technique, for me, is not the end point. In fact, my own technique is radically different to Don McCullin's, but I still find something inspirational about his photography. And I think the real thing that I'm trying to get to here is that our heroes are our heroes because they resonate, because their work resonates with us, and it's not through imitation that we get to rub shoulders with them, figuratively speaking, if we ever do, but it's all part of an ongoing learning curve. And I think the most learning for me that I do is when I'm actually out in the field with a camera, and it's that moment where you cease to hear anything around you. It's that moment where you're in the camera, you're locked in the compositional process, and it's capturing that frame. That's the thing, that's where I learn the most about photography. And we're going to have a look at Ansel Adams Zone system. Now, for those of you that don't know, Ansel Adams devised a system, and it's non-prescriptive, it's observational. This is a reflection of reality, but he divided up the number of tones between pure black and pure white into 11 different zones, measured zone 0 through to zone 10, and that gives us a framework for creating contrast in our pictures, because certain tones appear in certain zones naturally, as in the raw photograph, and by adjusting the contrast and doing local adjustments in Silver Efex Pro, for example, we can increase the contrast and make the most of the zones that we have, which is what Ansel Adams' original intention was. So although it wasn't devised for digital photography, it is in fact usable in digital photography. One word of warning is that you need to expose to the right to make this work, because we don't like to have pure blacks in our photography, and you want to be able to bring the detail and the tones out of the shadows. So expose to the right, expose to as far to the right as you can without clipping the highlights, and that will give you shadows that you will be able to retrieve detail from. And from that point we should then be able to apply in Silver Efex Pro Ansel Adams Zone system. Let's have a look and see how that works. So what we're seeing here is a neutral conversion into black and white, and the intention here, what I want to do is to have a quick look at the Ansel Adams Zone system, and I want to have a quick look at the color mask and see how that operates in the picture. Okay, let's have a look. So first of all, the Ansel Adams Zone system mapping. What we've got here in the histogram is a range of zones, and you can see as I drag the cursor across, you get hatchings which indicate where in the zone system certain things are falling. Now I can click to have it permanently on, and if I add selective tones in, I've got highlights, midtone, shadows and blacks, and I've got my number 10 switched on, so if I increase my highlights you'll see the hatchings appear there. Now what this hatching indicates is areas in practical terms that will not get printed if I send this out to print. These will appear as no ink whatsoever, whereas this would appear as some ink. So this is shadings that are less than white, and this is a really quite an effective way of seeing where the limits are. So if I take my pure black, switch off that, and if I take my blacks down here, and I can see the hatchings appear around this area. Okay, where this also manifests is if I want to apply a luminosity mask. So if I go down here and apply a luminosity mask, and I choose, let's say, this area for my luminosity mask, I can adjust this according to the zone system. So I can go 0 down here, or send the filter down there, and I can go here. Now I can set, if we could take this to its original, which I think was round about there, I can move the sliders around, and this is effectively modifying what's going on in this mask. So I don't want to take my midtones down too much because I'm losing a lot of detail around that smoke. But I can take my shadows down, and I can drop my highlights a little bit there, and the result of that is I get slightly better contrast. Okay, now let's have a look at the color mask. If I put a new color mask in and I take it to this area of mid-green, basically. Let's have a look at the color mask. You see it's measuring in colors, not in luminosity, and the interesting thing here is that as I drag it around the photograph, it's actually picking up color in the black and white image. So it's really translating tones into this. But what becomes even more interesting still is, let's say I increase that, darken this, bring my shadows down, actually keep my shadows somewhere realistic, keep my blacks out of trouble, more or less. Now if I move this around the picture, it takes these settings and applies them to the colours that I'm selecting with my pointer, and that's sometimes a good thing and sometimes not. But you can see very clearly here, for example, that I've got a very, very different picture now. Move this up to here, and it doesn't look the part at all. Move it to here, and we've got a fairly high contrast picture created using the color mask. What I would do here is just double check. You see I've got my hatchings back here, so within that particular color mask my choices raise these shadows, but that's not going to look good. Raise my blacks, that's not going to look good either. So I'm going to go for a general tonal difference and raise my blacks here. And this is all over the picture. So the difference here is that we're selecting tones and color, if you like, from within the picture. And the reason that this is producing what you might consider to be unpredictable results is that in this translation of color to tone, you're really mimicking, if you like, the effect of placing filters, I think, on a black and white development process. Again, if I go to sensitivity, a good shortcut here is to actually choose a film. So let's just get rid of some of these because they will be distracting. Turn that off. If I want to take a film type, look at the effect it has on these sensitivities. So this is mimicking the way films behave, or film stock behaves. I want to go to Silver Max, and this is a very good way of generating a starting point for your development process. And of course it can be tweaked within this. So if we want to if we sort of like Ilford Delta, we can actually change the effect a bit by tweaking here. So I think for me, that's giving me more definition up there. And I think I would move on from that and enhance that with a color mask that I would put in the sky to nail those blues, and let's see if that gives me a little bit more control there. And that to me seems to be a sensible way of doing things. So I would have a workflow which moves through observing whether I've got pure blacks and pure whites, and using selective tones to correct that initially, and then I will generally go to film stock and adjust the effect of that in these sliders here. And finally, I'll do some correction using my color mask or my luminosity mask to finer details within the picture. So I've used my color mask here to change the sky, and I've used a luminosity mask down here just to get at this dust floating in behind these trees, and I think that's produced quite a nice result. And if we go back now to Lightroom, we can see the original, but let's commit this, apply that. Okay, so we can flip between the original and the black and white conversion, and I think this speaks really to my point about black and white being more dramatic. Back to the garden. Okay, so that's it for today, guys. Thanks very much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you've got any questions or comments, please put them down below. Also, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, do that. Give us a tick. That really helps the channel get out to be seen by more people, and that would be absolutely fantastic. Next week we're going to have another video on a different topic, and we'll see you next week. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.